Cool. Are we live? Cool. I got notification we're live. Hey everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Brandon Hunter. I am a community-based engineer and scientist for the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice, and I'll be your moderator for the session. And it is a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you very much for joining us on the first day of the Siege Environmental Justice Symposium. And thank you for joining this particular session titled Indigenous Perspectives on Environmental, Climate, and Energy Justice Issues. And so we have some really good talks prepared for you today from some very esteemed speakers. But before we get going, I want to lay out a couple of housekeeping items. So the structure of this session, we have about an hour for the talks, and then a dedicated section at the end that will be about 20 minutes for Q&A. So that's collected for all the speakers. And today we have scheduled 4 great speakers. We have Jacqueline Shirley, Scott Clow, who might be joining us later, Dr. Deborah McGregor, and Chee. I'll have each of the speakers introduce themselves with a little bit more background, and then right after they introduce themselves, they can go directly into their talks. But before we start, I want to remind the speakers that we each have about 15 minutes, and we want to make sure that the last speakers have enough time for their talk. So if we could aim for about 15 minutes, that would be great. And also look into the chat, the private chat, for notifications about time running short, if that's applicable. So with that being said, I'll let Jacqueline Shirley introduce themselves and begin the presentation.
Koyana, thank you, Brandon. Koyana Dialogy, thank you for coming. Winga Jacqueline Abakbak Shirley. I am the granddaughter of the late Bridget Joseph and Fred Joseph of the native village of Hooper Bay along the Bering Sea coast. Am I going to go straight into my presentation, or are we going to do introductions, or do I just go into my presentation?
Yeah, you can go straight into your presentation.
And am I supposed to be pulling up my PowerPoint, or was you guys going to do that?
I don't have the capability to do that. Eden, are you able to do that? Or Jacqueline, are you able to do it yourself? Do you need IT to pull it up?
I'll be pulling it up.
Okay, awesome.
Sorry for the delay, everybody. I can't see my PowerPoint, but until those things get squared away, I am from the native village of Hooper Bay, but right now I currently live in the beautiful Kiwa-Tiwa territory along the Rio Grande in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Currently, right now, I'm at the Institute for Environmental Professionals, Tribal Lands and Environment Forum in downtown Milwaukee. When I was thinking about Milwaukee, I said, "Wow, we're not at a tribal casino, Milwaukee." I'm going to Google that and see what Milwaukee means, because it's usually an indigenous name. So the other night, though, when I was walking out, when we was looking for a place to eat, as we all do when we're in a new city, on the Hilton, downtown Milwaukee, on the plaque, on the wall outside, I want to do a land acknowledgement on the plaque on the Hilton, downtown Milwaukee. Indian Village site. This spot in 1833 was the site of an Indian village under the Potawatomi chief Kinzoim, or Lake Pickerel. The village was located near a clear spring at the foot of a steep bluff, atop which were more wampums and an Indian cemetery. A wild rice swamp lay east of the village. To the north, as far as Juneau River, stretched a swamp of cedar and tamarack, which was often submerged in 6 or 7 feet of water. The village was vacated in 1838 when the last of the Potawatomi were moved west of the Mississippi by the federal government. So I'm coming to you from a village of the Potawatomi, and I still can't see my PowerPoint, so I don't know what to do. But I'm going to talk on the Yupik perspective of environmental justice, climate change, and as a cultural barrier, as a traditional dancer, as a EJ advocate, as a member of the National Environmental Justice on Advisory Council to the EPA. I see my PowerPoint. And it's so nice that I am calling or coming to you actually live from a tribal environmental conference that throughout this conference, probably because EJ has risen up so much in this administration, EJ has filtered into the fabric of this conference. So I want to say a thank you and appreciation to EPA and the Northern Arizona University and other sponsors of this event that incorporated environmental justice concepts, environmental justice policy, environmental justice opportunities, and environmental justice. But what is environmental justice? As a Native person, as a Yupik, I can't move my slides. Oh, am I? So instead of the opening per session, I wanted to do the land acknowledgement. In my introduction, EJ origin, and then my tribal perspective on EJ. So I did a environmental justice presentation here on Tuesday. You can move the slide. Do I have to keep saying that? Move the slide forward, please, or can I do that? I don't know. So during my presentation here, because Indigenous people, we know our origin stories. We like to know the origin of things. And so I shared with the Indigenous people here from nations across the country, because a lot, especially the younger professionals and many not so young professionals might think that the environmental justice came from the EPA. No, it didn't. It come from the people of color, from the Black community in the Southwest of America, thinking why they got to be suffering all these bad things from trash. Why are we being dumped on when the other communities are not? How long have tribal nations been recognizing and fighting for environmental injustice? That's a thought that I was thinking when I was doing a little bit of research. And moving to 1990, and I might not have to say this to this audience, but let me tell you, during my presentation here, I read the preamble of the principles of environmental justice. We, the people of color, gather together in this multinational people of color environmental leadership summit to begin to build a national and international movement of all peoples of color to fight the destruction and taking of our lands and communities. Do hereby reestablish our spiritual interdependence on the sacredness of our Mother Earth, to respect and celebrate each of our cultures, languages, and beliefs of the natural world, and our roles in healing ourselves, to ensure environmental justice, to promote economic alternatives which could contribute to the development of environmentally safe livelihoods, and to secure our political, economic, cultural liberation that has been denied for 500 years of colonization and oppression, resulting in the poisoning of our communities and land and the genocide of our peoples. Do affirm and adopt these principles of environmental justice. I wanted to read that to my people, to the Indigenous young people here, and remind them and let them know that the EJ is not it's not an EPA program. It come from the people. And I'm very thankful that the EPA responded to this. Koyana Chakna, Koyana, thank you, EPA, for responding to this 3 years later after this one. The preamble. You could change the slide, please. And I just talked a little bit about, these principles, the medicine wheel and this other wheel, and how these are all together, because as Indigenous people, it is not just one element in our life. And here, I was just showing 1, 2, and oh no, you could move the slide. There's 17 principles of environmental justice. 1, 2, and 3, and 17 were my favorite ones that I just touched on in my presentation here. You could move on to the slides. And you could go on. Probably everybody here, probably experts on environmental justice, maybe grandfathers and grandmothers of the environmental movement. And I really want to thank all of you in the audience who were there at the beginning. Thank you. When I was researching for this presentation here at this tribal conference, one of the quotes I found that just made me cry, and here I had a NEJAC working group meeting. I think it was a water infrastructure working group, and I had tears in my eyes, and oh my goodness. And because I read this quote, and it made me think of the reservation systems, and I want to share it here. It's not really necessary to have racial animus. Once discriminatory zoning happens, everything after looks like non-discriminatory, even though it is. It's already been institutionalized into the system, even if people are not intentionally making the decisions. When we were put on reservations and put into certain neighborhoods and redlining and everything, those were racially based decisions. Now it's been so long and so normalized and so background noise, it seems all normal. Oh, we're not doing that to you because of racial. It made me cry, because now everything that is happening to the Indigenous people and tribal lands and Indian country and Alaska villages, those decisions are based on race, and even though they might not seem like. And this gentleman, as far as I know, there has been no policies that have produced measurable changes on the ground. And until we get to that point, environmental justice policy is nothing but window dressing. And it's this guy right here, Paul Mohe. And you know what? The EPA has contracted this guy to come work for him. I think he's a professor out of University of Michigan. And wow, this kind of rhetoric is being hired by the EPA. How fabulous is that? I like that. And it's a good thing. Next slide, please. My Yupik, there's me and my great grandma, Joan Hill, when I was a baby. You see that? I knew her. She didn't pass away till my mid-20s, but my last picture with her was in the 80s. And you know, the 80s big hair. Now you guys aren't going to see that picture. On that far side is me and my grandma, Bridget, and she's teaching me how to pluck geese. In the middle is my son, Tabaha, Water's Edge People Clan, Chinglak, my nation, Shirley. He was 14 when I took that picture, his last fishing trip in Alaska before we moved down to Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was my only child. He died New Year's Day, 2021, of fentanyl poisoning in his bedroom. I found him in the morning. When we are talking about environmental justice in tribal communities, Black communities, brown communities across our country, it is not just environmental. We got to remember our environment as Indigenous is lots of things. What I'm wearing, my wolf, my wolverine, my calf, my beads, inside lined with spotted seal that have all been hunted and prepared locally. Environmental justice is lots, and I want to share that lots with you. From an advocate for many years, for a mom for a shorter time, only 15. Environmental justice is food sovereignty. Environmental justice is social justice, criminal justice, civil justice, treaty justice, environmental justice for our animals who are dying because of us, the lowest beings. The lowest beings on this earth are killing the most high. Our plants, even my grass, that makes my dance fan with this reindeer beard dance fan. The earth that we're on, the waters, the hunters, the gatherers, the fisher persons, the preparers of those foods, the eaters, even the ceremony. We pray, we dance, we cry for all these beings. And at the same time, while we're killing them, our dance is environmental justice and our humor too. Sovereignty is all environmental justice. In tribal nations, it is not put into compartments. As a Yupik woman, I'm not just a compartment. I'm the universe, I'm the earth, I'm the water, I'm the seal. As Yupik and tribal and people of color and people of pain, we need to learn to trust that our truth is a truth and it matters to be spoken. It matters to be spoken to our champions and our non-champions and our haters. Like my grandma told me when she was preparing me for my first dance. It's my responsibility to share my Yupik ways, because she told me maybe if the outsiders know about the Yupik, they won't want to kill us anymore. We have to trust in ourselves, our issues, our values, and they're just because they are in concert with social, criminal, civil. They're in concert with alcohol abuse, church abuse, school abuse, child abuse, partner abuse, drug abuse, child death, elder death, no food, no water, no justice, no life. All that is all in environmental justice. Environmental justice practitioners, environmental justice policymakers, presidents, chairmen, Everybody, remember those things. We are holistic. And there needs to be a holistic approach. I met a beautiful lady at the picnic over there somewhere. I don't even know where I met. She said the EPA came and called her back after she worked for them for 42 years. She retired from EPA, and her name is Ann Hurd. And she really wants interagency, holistic approach for environmental justice. She said EPA could go in and, for example, fix lead abatement, remediate some lead. But what about if the roof is still leaking? What about if that family can't have food? What about if those children, it's not even safe for them to walk to school? What have we done? I wanted to share a blessing song. It's an old song, but it was put out again during the first part of the COVID pandemic that has ravished Native America again. And it ravished all our communities across this country and world. It's been just terrible. So in closing, I would like to share, I think it's on the, if you go back to my son's slide. Not that one. Yeah, where my son is at. This song right here. So I was supposed to, there was technical issues. So I'm supposed to listen. I can't dance without hearing the drum. For some reason, I can't. You guys can hear it, but I can't hear it. So I have to put the music on my cell phone. And now let me try to move this camera. So am I supposed to start it, or can you start it? I'm supposed to have it. How's it supposed to work again? Are you guys supposed to open it for me?
Are you not able to open it on your end right now, Jacqueline?
Let me exit full screen. How did we practice it?
Yes, I'll try to see if IT can pull it up if you're not able to do so.
Because we seen it when we were practicing the presentation, right?
We did. I think it might be pulling up now.
Hi, I'm Todd Colbert.
Oh, those doggone commercials. Are you guys seeing the commercials, or is the song starting?
1986.
Can somebody talk to me?
I hear audio, but I don't see video.
Not yet.
We're all very involved in the high standards of our work and reputation. And that has meant hearing the voices of
what are you guys seeing or hearing?
Application process. We wanted to take an honest look at both our success.
I think we've got the right image, but I think we're ready to come to it.
Since we all share a piece of this company, we share.
I think we're hearing the audio of an ad right now. Oh, it's starting now. It's starting now. The video's starting.
Embodying these words is how we make all of our decisions and uphold the integrity.
I don't know what's going on, what you guys are seeing.
The people we serve.
From all of us here at WeatherTight, thank you for awarding us.
We're hearing the audio of a commercial again.
Oh. Well.
One moment. I think we're having technical difficulties. I think it might clear up in a second.
But want to stay flexible? Kayak searches hundreds of travel sites to show you which flights are waiving no change fees. So you can book now and adjust later if plans change. Kayak. Search one and done.
Can somebody let me know when the...
It's going now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jacqueline, for such a great talk. Such a powerful message. And well, first, we're all really sorry for your loss. Um, Thank you for sharing something that's so personal with us. And I think there are comments in the chat box sending love to you. And thank you very much for reminding us about the preamble of the 17 principles. I think that's something that's very important. That's often missed whenever we reference. So thank you for the important reminder that it comes from the people, and it's more than just the environment. It affects everything. Thank you.
You're welcome, and it was a pleasure to share this with Deborah and Chelsea. I'm really watching the clock because I might have to shut my and get my lift down to Milwaukee Airport. But thank you, everybody, and it was my honor for the invitation.
Yes. Thank you very much. And just like you, we also have to get moving. And
Yes.
so next we have on the program, we'll move to Dr. Deborah McGregor, and I'll have her introduce herself and then provide her talk.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to folks, because I know people are tuning in from all over Turtle Island and the world, so want to make sure I've got everybody covered. So Jacqueline, first of all, Chimigwech for that presentation. I think it was a perfect way to start the session. Even though I know you were first, so you could catch your Uber, be able to catch the airport. It seemed to work out as these things go. So I am Anishinaabe from Whitefish River First Nation, and I have the opportunity to literally be in my community. If this were last week or even next week, I would be in Toronto. So I'm really happy that I'm in my community, and if I look out of the corner of my eye, I can see the waters in front of me. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is sort of where I'm going with some of the research that I'm engaged in, building a little bit off of what Jacqueline said, because I think she really set the stage, I think, for some of my comments. And I agree wholeheartedly that environmental injustice impacts Indigenous people's lives in every single way that you can imagine, because a lot of our lives has to do with our relationships to the natural world, to our ancestors, future generations, and the spirit world. So I think maybe that's Jacqueline for covering that and setting the stage. Unfortunately, I'm the boring academic. So, but I'll try not to be so boring. I do have a PowerPoint, and I'll bumble along here because I'm a Zoom person. So there is some effort in me trying to pull up my screen. I did try to focus on images because in our test session we weren't able to get full screen, and I didn't want you to be stuck with a bunch of text that you'd be squinting at the screen trying to read. So let's see if I'll be successful here. But as I'm trying to figure out this technology, I'll talk a little bit about how I'm framing some of the work that I'm doing. So Steve, if you can do this. So a lot of the direction that I've gone in some of the research that I've done over the years with Indigenous environmental justice, and I wholeheartedly agree with Jacqueline in terms of that it's Indigenous environmental justice is, in my view, actually was long before people even invented the term. I think a lot of Indigenous societies have their own concept of what it is. And okay, not sure what you're seeing. Hopefully you are seeing the PowerPoint because I can't see the chat. Okay, good. All right. Is that we are, as she pointed out, we already had our own concepts of how to live well with the natural world, with our relatives, the animals, and the plants. And we already had our own systems of governance and laws to enable those kind of sustainable relationships. I think now what you find is more of a terminology to be able to describe that. And what I'm doing in my work is working around this emerging terminology called planetary health, or sometimes what I call planetary well-being, because this is what I've heard in some of the work that I've done with traditional knowledge holders and elders. That's what they're talking about, but they don't necessarily call it that. So that's sort of my more recent orientation as a way to try to think about like how you scale from what I hear locally to what's happening across the planet. So hopefully I do justice to sort of my thinking around that in the 15 or so minutes that I have. So as I mentioned, Indigenous peoples have already been here. We had our own knowledge systems, our governance and laws about how we are going to live well with creation. And I'll speak for Anishinaabe because I'm Anishinaabe, and I'm not going to say that we are perfect in a lot of our stories. Sometimes we did face a disaster, like in the Anishinaabe, we have the creation story, a destruction, and then a recreation story where we receive instructions for how to live sustainably. So I think the difference for really thousands of years of the existence of my nation and ancestors is that we could solve our own problems on our own terms with colonization, capitalism, imperialism, all those other processes. We're not able to do that. We're constrained in being able to do that, as Jacqueline pointed out in her presentation. But we had this, and really for most of our existence, that's how it was on the lands and territories that we find ourselves. So I think we always have to remember that we had it. And what we're trying to do is make sure that it makes it into the conversations in these broader processes of basically planet crisis, environmental crisis, ecological crisis, climate crisis. To me, like this image that you're seeing, Spirit in the Land. So I'm referring to, so like what I really liked about, there's a lot, what I really appreciated Jacqueline's presentation is how dance and song and story also conveys our knowledge and experience. So what I do in my research is I work a lot with our stories. One of my favorite ones that I work at, there's all kinds of lessons, as you know, that you learn from our stories. And one of the ones I like right now is Anishinaabe Pipe and the Eagle story. And so it recognizes that there's spirit in the land, that we have this relationship. And in this story, Anishinaabe are facing destruction because we're not behaving properly in relation to the natural world. We're not being nice to each other nor to the natural world. So we're facing a destruction. And I don't have time to get into the whole story, but in the story, it's the animals who petition on our behalf to live, to continue to live well. If the and the eagle being flying the highest is charged with being able to find people who are still living well with the earth, still understand what their obligations and responsibilities are to the natural world. And the eagle is able to petition on our behalf to withhold destruction and continue, as long as we continue to be able to live up to our responsibilities and obligations, because the natural world does. It's generally people who don't, and I mean by people more collectively in this. But I'll refer to this story later on. So in a lot of our stories, there's a lot of lessons. And what I learned is in Anishinaabe, we've had to face our annihilation before, and we've had to face it again in more recent centuries due to colonization and other forces. So I call this, so it can be so horribly depressing to see what's going on in the world. But I think one thing about our stories, it always gives us hope, because it's always based on these other values that are really important to make us see into the future. And I like to think about it as living well. So in the Anishinaabe, we have this concept of Mininabadzawin, which it is to live well. And we live well with all of creation. We live well with all of the world. It's not just for people to live well, but for the natural world to live well. And a lot of this has to do with understanding and living up to our own responsibilities and obligations to each other and the natural world. So we already had these concepts of planetary health and justice and how to live well. So these are what I call the disaster reports. Many of you are familiar with this. I call it planetary health, code red, these reports that have recently come out from the IPCC, pointing to the fact that massive changes going around the planet. Humans are responsible for it, just like in a lot of our stories. When there's going to be disaster, it's usually people who've misbehaved or not conducting themselves properly in relation to others in the natural world. And that some of these changes are now irreversible. We've got to that point now. The IPBS report, the same thing, disappearing species going on around the planet as well. And of course, the World Water reports that come out every year on World Water Day. And they're all pointing to not a good situation. And what ironically all of them call for is transformation. We need to massively transform society at every level in order to move ideally in a path of more sustainability and appropriate relations with all of creation. And I feel that Indigenous peoples can lead the way on that, because we haven't forgotten. Because most of, again, our history is knowing how to do that. We have knowledge systems and legal systems and governance systems, and that we could show leadership in this regard. And we've already had to survive our annihilation and genocidal policies and processes and practices in our communities that Jacqueline pointed out. I'm not going to read this. You can read it. This just again points to that Indigenous peoples, like we already had our own processes in place, and a lot of it was to live in harmony with the natural laws of Mother Earth, to live in harmony with the earth. And ironically, the United Nations recently put out a report, 2021, saying that trying to set a path forward to be able to make peace with the earth. When I read these, I'm thinking we already knew how to do that as Indigenous people. We already have a set of principles that teach us how to do that. And we know this because, and there's increasingly more research on this, is around the planet, Indigenous peoples, I say caretake, others might say manage, 20% of the Earth's landmass, but that's where 80% of the biodiversity is, and that's where Indigenous languages are spoken. So people are trying to understand this more. I mean academics. Indigenous peoples know why, but other people are trying to understand this and recognize there's something to learn from Indigenous people. So in my research, I'm trying to be solution oriented. I would like future generations to be able to inherit solutions and not just problems all the time and crisis after crisis. And I feel like this would come through our own knowledge systems. And this is just a picture of my family in the sugar bush. There's my nephew and my sons working in the Great Lakes. We make maple syrup in our family, and it's a big deal in the Anishinaabe tradition. So one of the things that I'm trying to do in the work that I do, because I find myself in these circles in Canada, part of climate assessment processes, where Indigenous knowledge is not really forming part of those assessments, and therefore is not forming part of how we understand mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and that's what gets funded. This is how people are developing national adaptation strategies. And a lot of our knowledge is not there. And what I often hear is that, well, we don't have the baseline. We don't actually really kind of know what the changes are. And I argue that we do. So in the Anishinaabe tradition, this could be done through the 13 moon system. Well, it's one moon with 13 phases, because in every single one of those phases, like our seasonal realm and calendars, we know what's supposed to be happening. And that's passed on from generation to generation over thousands of years. So we already have a baseline. We know what the changes are. Today's the full moon for August. What's supposed to be happening during this moon? If it's not happening, then we know that there's a massive change. So part of the research approach and strategy that I'm trying to develop is, how do we actually listen to the land, like something my ancestors were able to do? And by looking to see how does the moon how does the natural world sort of direct what we know about what's happening? I included an image of the turtle because the 13 moons is sort of represented around some of you may know this, around the turtle's shell. Well, there's a 28 days. I don't know if you can see my cursor. And then there's the 13, I don't know what to call them. I'm not a biologist. The segments around the turtle is actually 13. And I unfortunately terrorized a little turtle crossing the road there, and I checked, I counted. So it's interesting that there's this land knowledge that's also connected to the sky world. Like, there's just such immense knowledge that my ancestors would have had that I'm trying to understand to see how it can inform these broader processes. I think what Jacqueline was able to really point out well in her presentation is the way we experience climate change or climate crisis is holistically. It's not in silos the way that the problem is studied. So we need to sort of rely on our own experience and knowledge to try to inform the solutions and the path forward. It doesn't mean that that work is irrelevant. It's really important. It just isn't the way that we understand our relationship to the world and how we might want to formulate our own solutions, and therefore our own plans and strategies moving forward. So I call these self-determined solutions. What tends to happen in the Canadian context is other people formulate solutions and then impose them on Indigenous people. They set up funding programs, and then we all scramble and compete with each other for this limited funding to try to access other people's ideas of what the solution is, rather than creating our own self-determined solutions based on our own knowledge of what we want and the kind of relationship we want with each other, and ensuring that our future generations are going to not just survive, but thrive, live well with the world. So I refer to these as self-determined solutions. We come up with them, and it's more grassroots and then feeds into these broader processes. So in a workshop that I facilitated with youth and elders, they started to imagine what their future was. So tackling the problem of the huge challenge of climate environmental crisis is you need imagination. we need to pop ourselves out of this box that's not sustainable at all, and think in terms of transformation. And I like this because the youth came up with these images and these ideas around love. Do we love the earth? And I have to say that when I'm in Indigenous context, that comes up as an important value in terms of how we see our future, how we see reconnecting with the earth. And I don't see that in other circles that I found myself in climate change circles. So I think that we have this set of values that are really important in terms of imagining what kind of future that we want to have. Some of this is already represented in the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth. And so, which you can just Google and find it. So these ideas around how we scale up from the local to the global. And I know I only have a couple more minutes left, and I am near the end. So our own stories, just like our own dance and our own songs, we have our own stories that can guide us in terms of how we want to move forward, how we're going to self-determine our own future, determine what our solutions are going to be, understanding our own experience. And humans are the cause of climate change, according to what I call the disaster reports. But we also are the key to changing the course of destruction as well. We're also gifted with being creative and brilliant and wonderful and imaginative and transformative. So we need to tap into those to those gifts that we have in order to envision a different future to ourselves. And also our stories tell us that we also need to turn to the natural world for guidance, or turn to nature for guidance. Just like in the Pipe and the Eagle story, it's the eagle who petitions on our behalf in order to withhold destruction. So there's a lot to learn from the natural world itself. Knowledge is held there as well. So our future, loving the earth. So this is my 2-year-old niece working in the sugar bush. So I think we ask ourselves different kind of questions. In some of these scientific circles I find myself in, because people didn't ask the right questions 4 decades ago, 3 decades ago, 2 decades ago. I don't mean they weren't good questions, but they weren't questions that were always relevant to Indigenous peoples in terms of how they're framing what is the problem of climate change and what then are going to be the solutions. How do we diagnose this? That we ask ourselves different questions. Do we love future generations? How will our work benefit future generations? What kind of ancestor are we going to be? So these are the kind of questions that I try to think about when I'm doing the research that I do, or the work that I do in Indigenous communities, or these other circles that I find myself in. So hopefully this sort of gives you a bit of insight into this work that I'm doing, and very, I think, grassroots in trying to understand our own knowledge and language in understanding what's going on, and then moving us hopefully into a future that makes sense and is going to be sustainable. So Chee for your time, and looking forward to Chelsea's presentation. So hopefully my screen went away and what I'm seeing is what you're seeing. Chee.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Cool. Yeah, thank you, Dr. McGregor, for your talk. And thanks for reminding us that that environmental justice was very much so a thing before there was a term as we know it. And thank you for being solutions oriented, and not just any solutions as you were talking about, but self-determined solutions, because there's a very big difference. And thank you for pointing out that people try to cook up these solutions and try to force them on people when sometimes the answer is already there. You just gotta ask the right people and have the right people make the decisions for themselves. So thank you very much. And next we'll have Chee, and I'll have Chelsea introduce herself and then give her talk.
Hello, everyone. Hi, I am Chee. My pronouns are she, her, and I work for nonprofit Native Renewables. That's with Indigenous founded, Indigenous and operated. And we learn a little bit about that. I want to set my timer, get to a certain point at a certain time. So let me share my screen. Welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I am happy to be here. And I also want to thank those before me in sharing their vast knowledge and information with all of us. I am sharing my screen right now, and please let me know if you can see it. On my end, it says it's loading. While I do that, I will start my introduction. So first of all, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement. And actually, let's put a pin in that. So in this slide here, I wanted to just put my personal perspective on environmental climate and energy justice.
Chelsea? Chelsea, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think I think your audio is cutting out a little bit. Would it be possible to cut off your video to decrease the bandwidth? And I think maybe your audio might be clearer for us.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, do you mind turning off your video?
Can you hear me? Anything better?
Not really. Your audio. Oh, did we lose her? Chelsea?
I think
Deborah, is it just you and I right now?
I'm thinking maybe the the internet became unstable. She's not in. She's going to probably try to get back in again.
Okay. I was hoping that maybe turning off the video could help with the audio as we waited for her her materials to queue. But I guess maybe we'll give it a minute or so for her to come back. Because I would hate to cut it off there. If anything, I think we'll just cut off time at the end. If there's no time for Q&A, there's no time for Q&A. But I'd like to see if she can come on. Let's see. Okay, cool. Looks like she's coming on.
Can you hear me? Hello, hello.
Oh, yes.
Better?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I have no idea what is going on. It was working great earlier, so I'll just leave my slides off, and we can share that in a bit. But I wanted to do a land acknowledgement. I am saying hello from Scottsdale, Arizona, which is home to the Akamil Otham. They are also known as Pima. That's the English version, or Salt River Pima. And then the Peeposh, also they are the English identifier is the Salt River Maricopa, and then the Hohokam. There are some other neighboring tribes here, Yavapai, Dana Otham, and Akchin. And I wanted to encourage those of you out there who are a part of this to do a little bit of homework and visit a website that we will share in a little bit on figuring out where you are at and where your campuses are, maybe where you call home, and what Indigenous peoples may have lived there before, but also currently live there. And so that's one big part in learning about justice issues. But I also wanted to share that from my perspective, going back to this is my perspective on this topic, is that I am Navajo, which is one of 574 federally recognized tribes, not to mention the hundreds of state recognized, but also non-recognized tribes. And even in that identifier itself is a justice issue. Also that I am one of 399,494 tribal members from my Navajo tribe. I grew up on the homelands within the tribal nation. And then I understand the language. I'm still working on being fluent in the language. And all of these pieces, as I'm sharing, is just to give you some perspective of where I'm going to be coming from. I come from a two-parent family, which for some people in our communities it could be rare. My adult years have been spent in urban areas for mostly higher education and then later on for jobs. And one of my biggest personal injustice story is that I had to learn about these injustices in the higher education realm and not where I grew up. And I can talk a little bit about the biggest one that I learned. And the house that I grew up in has its own injustice story that's tied to this work that I've been doing. The big thing as I am talking through this is to think about this ripple effect. These actions, these decisions, these words have a ripple effect when it comes to injustice, and especially in environmental, climate, and energy. And if you, as we are going through the rest of this presentation, just thinking about this one drop of, let's say, a law from the federal government, how it affected all of these people, not including my ancestors and myself, even to this day, many generations later. And then also for you to think about what is your ripple effect after hearing these stories and hearing these perspectives and understanding and learning these things now, and what is going to be your ripple effect moving forward. So for environmental injustice for the Navajo Nation, we have been affected by uranium development, coal development, and power plants. So like I said, we could share these slides later. Want to share that for the Navajo Nation, There have been uranium mines since the 1940s, the middle 1940s, and thinking about the health implications from the people who were mining the uranium who were Navajo, and how these mines were scattered across Navajo and the effects that it had on the land, but also the water when that uranium was disturbed, and how it's fed into the water. And again, thinking about this ripple effect from going into the water, seeping into the water table, the aquifer, people are drinking it, animals are drinking it, the plants are drinking it, and then people then are eating those plants, using it for nourishment, or again, drinking the water, and then for the animals too. And then for for a lot of the people from this area, it's super rural. And so animals, the livestock that we do have, cattle and sheep, are also sources of food for us. And if they're eating the plants and drinking the water that's affected by uranium, it eventually goes into our bodies. And then, not to mention the wind coming through and picking up those particles and affecting the health of the people in the area. And still today, there are abandoned uranium sites. And what was the reason for their uranium? Why did people need that? To develop it and use it as weapons, to use it as energy development. And it came at a cost of a lot of people. And for this particular, for my particular homelands and nation, it affects a lot of people, even to this day. Moving on to coal, and this is the part where I learned about the injustice that was happening in my backyard. Coal development occurred in the mid-1970s, and part of that development not only was the extraction of the actual coal itself, but was mixing it up with water that could be used for personal consumption, to be delivered outside of the nation where it came from, the land where it came from, to near Las Vegas, to be generated for electricity for Las Vegas, Flagstaff, Phoenix, Tucson, for these big metropolitan areas where, if I'm in Scottsdale right now, is there a coal area here? Where is that energy coming from? And that's another question to ask yourselves. Where does your energy come from? Where does your water come from? And is it coming at the expense of other people? A big piece here, and going back to the two presenters that had shared earlier, was that culture is affected. When land is being mined, or when there's companies coming in making a profit off of these things, people have to be moved, and that affects culture. Not only the land itself, or the water that's being used to move this coal from one area to the next, and it affects the people there, and some people had to move. And just imagine yourself living somewhere for many generations, and then you're asked to move. You're not even asked, you're forced to move, and to try to figure out another place to rebuild your family. And so culture is affected by this. The plants that your ancestors might have known as medicine, or might have known as food, now you have to move like hundreds of miles away and re-establish yourself in a place that you might not know. And some people didn't even get to stay on the Navajo Nation. They had to move to nearby cities, and they lost culture because of these things, and ceremony and prayer and songs, and they lost some identity. And imagine that for yourself. So this is the injustice piece. I like to use the injustice part, because the justice piece is now happening. It's like, how do we seek to resolve the crappy things that had happened in the past? And that's environmental injustice. Climate injustice now, with the changing, with the global warming. And where my communities are, we have extreme weather happening right now. So we have monsoon seasons, and now it's just like a downpour of rain. And so we have people who live really far from paved roads, and their roads are all wiped away. And how do they get to medical facilities? How do they get food from the grocery stores if their roads are not there anymore? So those and that's just going to keep happening. So how do we, for my organization, but also for me myself, how do I help to ensure that the people that are in those homelands or on their homelands are sustainable enough to take care of themselves when the weather gets even worse? Because that's, with climate, the changing environment and the climate, it is going to get that way. And then I also live in the Southwest, so it's going to get even hotter. How are we going to prepare for those things? Also, and then coming down to the energy injustice. So where we are from, where I am from, in the communities that I work in, there are about 15,000 people who don't have electricity in the freaking United States. 15,000 people don't have electricity. And imagine some of those people don't even have running water. So you go to the restroom, you flush your toilet, wash your hands. That can't happen for some people in my community. And that's how I grew up. I grew up with no running water. I had electricity, luckily, but not a lot of people, even to this day, have that. And so for the organization that I work with, we are working to address that. We're a nonprofit that works to provide off-grid solar for homes that don't have electricity, Navajo and Hopi specifically. And one big piece also coming back to this injustice piece is, one, there are people that we're working with that have for decades been providing areas like Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Las Vegas with electricity at an affordable rate when they don't even have it themselves. Also on that is, those people who don't have electricity are not contributing at the same rate to the greenhouse gas emissions as other people, and they're going to be affected by climate probably even more than other people. How fair is that? So those are just some things that I wanted to point out, and I want to play the video that we are about the work that we're doing with my nonprofit, with the nonprofit that I work with. So Eden, can you play that? And also, can you share the amount of time that I have left? Okay, I think the video is coming on. So this video was produced while it's being shared. I don't think I can share it from my end because of the bandwidth situation. So if somebody can share for me, that would be great. But it took us about a year.
Working on it.
Oh, thank you. It took us about a year to get this video put together, and we just released it. So here it is. I'm unable to hear the audio.
I heard the audio for a second. It was kind of soft. I don't hear audio right now. I think we're going to try it again.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience and all of these technical difficulty glitches things. I think it just happens at the right time at the wrong moments, right? So as they're getting the video up, like I said, we're a nonprofit. Let's see, let's try this again.
And then Chelsea, maybe try muting yourself while the video plays. That might help. That's what I'm seeing from ID.
Why is this happening? Why aren't families getting power? Why is there no solid program or infrastructure that's actually helping Navajo families? When I was younger, I would spend a lot of time at my grandparents' homes on the Navajo reservation. It's funny because I thought everyone knew what it was like to live off-grid or not have electricity, and it wasn't until I got older that I realized It's not a common thing, and most people are shocked, I think, that so many families don't have power.
On Navajo Nation, there's approximately 10,000 households that don't have electricity in their homes. That's a huge challenge. If they're lucky, families have electrical lines coming to their homes. But if they're in a remote area where they can't get access to the electrical grid, they're going to have to figure out another way to get power to their homes.
When we first moved out here, we're just getting used to everything off grid. We're trying to figure out what we'd use for lighting. And one of the first things we used was some kerosene, lanterns, and then we upgraded to propane. And along with that, we had candles. We've been using a generator for power and really small solar system that we've been using for lights and also for charging our phones. And that's all that we have.
Okay, so what do we have packed for tomorrow?
Well, 3 amp breakers.
Native Renewables is a native-led nonprofit organization that is focusing on solving energy access to get power to roughly 15,000 families who don't have access to grid-tied electricity. And we do that by providing off-grid solar installation, education, and workforce training.
Navajo Nation has had a long history of coal mining and coal jobs. So it's kind of ironic to know that we were one of the largest tribes to provide coal for electricity in this part of the United States. And yet there's still homes on Navajo without electricity.
Ultimately, it's like we're just frustrated for our people, and someone needs to be here to help them.
We're about 100 miles one way from the hardware store or a solar store. So it's good to have a list to be able to pack and kit. I've been doing electrical work for approximately 39 years. I'm pretty much the electrician out in the field, so I'll garner my tool belt to make sure that the home is wired safely. So I believe we're driving in this direction.
Yeah.
Next stop to 89. According to this, it's probably like hour and a half. Working out in the remote areas, we're pretty much at the beck and call of the weather because there's different soil conditions out in Indian country. You can get stuck there.
We have the battery cable.
We are trying to be an organization that trains people and invests in them. Our staff is all Navajo and Hopi. Most of our team lives on the res and they're from the communities we work in.
I commute to the office and that takes me about 2.5 hours one way. It's worth it because we're helping out the Native American families, Navajo families, Hopi families get power.
At the end of the day, when we install everything and turn on that light, you could see that smile, You can feel it in their hearts, that it's a good feeling.
All right. Cool.
Ready to go.
All right. Yeah. Hit the road. The sun is a critical part of our daily living. Traditionally, we pray in the direction of the sun. Farmers know what the patterns are of the sun, and they use that to literally grow life and food for our communities. So giving them the knowledge of solar energy and allowing them to feel that energy independence of being able to manage their own system and own their own power is super exciting.
Hey, how's it going? It's good to see you guys again.
You, yeah.
Yeah. Umahinsake. You guys excited to get your house wired with solar? We'll be here for a couple of hours and then hopefully get your house going and then we'll be out of your hair.
They've been out here for about 3 or 4 visits and every time they give us a little more education on the power system.
I'm really happy to see natives giving back to natives. They're all so knowledgeable and real skilled, and we're just so grateful that they chose us to give this project to.
Got it? Yeah.
Like if we look at the compass, it's facing true south. we get a chance, we'll check the angles so that we can get the most sunlight.
We have 6 children and 8 grandchildren. So family is everything. Gathering is everything. And the kitchen is often a place where people gather. And that's how I'd like our kitchen, especially like during the holidays. We don't have holidays here. So to have more light in our house, that's real important to us, is to have people feel welcome.
So by this evening, you'll be able to use the switches for the first time in your house. Turn on your lights.
Wow, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
She was saying that you'll come back every year and check it.
Yes.
And that's like, wow, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's going to be a great service to us.
I think it is a joy to see the tribes actually thrive on solar and develop clean energy based on natural resources. When they are able to turn on the light in their home, it's power from the sun when they flip that switch.
Wow, look at that.
That's bright.
It's right. Really bright.
It's really bright.
To think about how long we've depended on the sun to be able to live. I think it just makes sense for Native cultures to lead the effort with clean energy. It's just so exciting to see that they've used technology to tap their own natural resources for their own energy future.
It's just kind of emotional in a way. I'm so grateful.
Thank you, and please visit our website. You got to see my team in action. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chelsea, for such a great talk. Thank you for talking about the water injustices, especially the energy injustices. One of the questions that you asked that really stuck out to me was, like, where does your energy come from? And like, does it come at the expense of others? Because we hear a lot about how electric is the way everything's being electrified, but not all electric power is equitable. And sometimes it comes at the expense of others. And so thank you for that very important reminder. And so I see that we have about 5 minutes left. We are down to 2 panelists now. So I think we might have time for one question. And then at the end, I'm going to ask for like 30 seconds to a minute of like final thoughts from the remaining panelists. So one of the questions that we had preloaded was addressing the speakers. So y'all have been working on different issues through different lenses and in different roles and directions, including policy, law, advocacy, and industry, and otherwise. If you could give advice to administrators and lawmakers for advancing climate and energy justice based on your current works and positions, what would that advice be?
I can start. Thank you, Chelsea, for sharing. I really enjoyed that video, smiling the whole time. I do find myself in this position, and I continually advocating for Indigenous leadership in climate, energy, acknowledgement and respect for Indigenous knowledge and our perspectives, and that we need to be there. I mean, there is this sort of rhetoric around broader policy context around Indigenous leadership, but there isn't actually support for it. So those are generally things I'm always advocating for in different spaces that I'm in, and that Indigenous people can come up with their own solutions. And as Chelsea pointed out, that sometimes other people's solutions can actually cause injustice in Indigenous communities. So people need to kind of peel back the layers and think that through. The other is to it's just starting to happen in Canada with a new bill coming out to consider environmental racism and justice in any kind of policy or legislation. Like, what is going to be the impact of this on people who are the most marginalized and vulnerable a lot of the time? So it's not law yet. We're trying to get there. So that might make people at least think about it, because right now they don't. So it's those are generally like some of the things that I'm always trying to advocate for, that Indigenous peoples are smart and we can come up with solutions. We're not just hapless victims waiting for other people's solutions. So that's a very prominent narrative that requires challenging. So I'll turn it over to Chelsea.
Hello, Chelsea. Are you still with us? Chelsea,
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
So just yes, I can. Thank you. Policy-wise, my recommendation would in writing policy, encouraging a multi-prong approach and not just sharing a policy or bill or whatever it is, spending whatever it is toward the tribal nations themselves, but for tribal, not only nations, maybe their utilities, but also nonprofits, academia, and the local cultural knowledge as well, and in encouraging that interwoven solution building instead of just to the tribal nation itself. And that's one thing that I learned working with this nonprofit is we comprise of tribal folk helping to provide solutions for fellow tribal community members. And sometimes it's difficult for us to work with tribal nations. So just, I think encouraging that building and the multi-pronged approach would be great in policy creation.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we have 1 minute left, and so I want to give each of the speakers like 2 sentences. If you could give like a final kind of last whether 2-sentence summary or a call to action or however you best see fit. Anybody can take it first.
I can go. Quick, visit our website, nativerenewables.org, 1, and 2, think about your ripple. What effects are you going to make? And your consumption, it starts with you. What are you consuming? Water, energy, land, etc. So think about those things. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chelsea. Great question, Brandon. I think what I would like to leave people a message with is to think about and I guess respect knowledge that may not necessarily be coming from people all around us, and that requires developing and working on some kind of relationship with the natural world around you, whether you're in an urban setting. Like most of the times I'm in Toronto, so it's a little bit harder sometimes, but we can always connect to the sky. The moon's always there. I sincerely believe that that the earth is telling us what's going on if we have the capacity to be able to listen. I just have the utmost respect for my ancestors, and I wish I could do what they do. So for folks out there, I think there are abilities that we can all develop, that we need to use our imagination and senses and be creative and innovative to look for solutions beyond the human dimension. That would be the message that I would give. I think we're all capable of that. Chimigwech for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Those are both very powerful messages. I want to first thank our speakers and then thank everybody for joining us today for this special session. And I hope that you're able to join us for the rest of the sessions at this conference, rather today and tomorrow, and hopefully the third day. And so that will conclude the session for Indigenous perspectives on environmental, climate, and energy justice issues. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.